Hello and welcome back to Dev Game Club, a weekly podcast in which two veteran game developers look at games from the past to discuss their relevance and impact today. I'm Brett Duville, and I'm joined as always by my co-host, a man who wishes he had Dante's hair.
Tim Longo.
Or really, any hair at all.
Yeah, I was going to say I wouldn't be picky at this point. I'm up for whatever. Just bring it to me.
Just get some. So that was my enemy intro.
Oh,
so there's directly a segue into our first topic.
How is that a direct segue into enemy intros?
That I just did an enemy intro.
Oh, you're the enemy.
Well, we're mutual.
Okay,
enemies.
Got it. Yeah, we're each other's enemy. Okay,
I like to think of myself the hero in this story, the one with the hair.
That's what the enemy always thinks.
The hero. I mean, I don't think you're Ben Grimm.
Okay.
I was trying to think of any heroes who are bald. There's just not tons of them.
Okay.
Lobot.
Professor X.
Okay, well, there's one. I'll give you that one.
Anyway, we'll think of some more. If you can think of any
not
bald
as many
heroes,
as with hair,
please write in. Oh, of course. Well, he's not always, but Nick Fury in
oh, that's true. Yeah, you look just like him
in the Ultimate series. Anyway,
Also, hello. We're talking about Devil May Cry.
Devil May Cry.
And enemy intros.
And we're off track already. Good. Sort of. Yeah, the enemy intro point that I wanted to make, and I was kind of passionate about in this last session because we've played. By this point, we've actually played quite a variety of enemy types, both small and large. And of course, in this era with boss introductions, they typically were always fairly good anyway, and people were really getting the hang of boss intros. And though I think in this particular game, as a quick aside, I do wish that they would introduce the abilities of the bosses a little better, because it's definitely trial by fire, trial by error, trial and error in this case. But separate from that, even what you'd say fodder enemies, or the enemies you're meeting throughout the game, whether it be the banshees or, for instance, there's in this session that we played last, there's that one courtyard area where there's sort of those lizard men kind of guys with the tails that they swipe at you. There's three of them. They come out. They even spent time with a little like intro for those guys where they're kind of burrowing through the ground, and you kind of come into this courtyard and they cut the camera, and then they give them a moment. And you're like, oh, this is something interesting. What's happening? And then it turns out generally, they're not bosses for sure, but generally they're maybe like mid-tier enemies, but they still got their own intro,
Yeah.
And that's the reason I wanted to bring it up for the cast, is myself being guilty of this as well. That is something that is definitely an unsung thing that a lot of game developers do, I think. Enemy intros are really critical, and they're often people either devalue them, or they kind of end up on the cutting room floor, or you run out of time, or whatever it is. And even for minor enemies, I think it's important, because it gives enemies a good sort of rooted identity when you first see them for the first time, and then every time after that, you have that a bit of gravitas around them, even if they're a fodder enemy. So I just kind of been impressed with, I think pretty much every single enemy that they've had so far has been introduced in an interesting way for its time. Still, pretty simple, but for its time good. And then usually in an interesting location. The room that they're in is kind of fits well with the enemy type. Like I think the banshees, for instance, was they were introduced in our last session, but they were in that one weird sort of library kind of room. I think you got the shotgun in that room, and there was like
there's a painting
growing through
that you pull a thing out of with an image of the Grim Reaper on it, and I think that image is meant to parallel them because it disappears afterwards, which is a really nice touch. I mean, I wouldn't sell yourself too short. I think the Republic Commando had some pretty good enemy introductions. They were all in camera or in helmet, I guess we'd say. So sometimes you could miss them, which is definitely a a tough part of doing that, is that it can be very difficult to stage. I think we even did a pretty good job of introducing the weapons, the unique weapons and things like that as you play through. Mm-hmm. Or even friendly characters like the Wookiees. The Wookiee in particular has a really good introduction. But again, there are things you can miss because you're in the first person, and that is definitely a thing that you get when you just play a little movie, for example. Here, there's definitely a sense in which these characters are better established, even the minor ones, as a result of that. I think so far the only ones that haven't had an introduction are the marionettes. And I think that is a deliberate choice to make them kind of a surprise. They're just kind of there as part of the environment. And so there's not really an introduction of them in that way where they get a little movie or what have you.
Yeah. They probably could have done something, but they're sort of like part of the scenery, if you will. And then they kind of come to life. So it's like creepy in that way. I think every time you see them, I think a little bit of dread. They're always like, just collapsed on the ground like a puppet, and then they kind of come to life. So that's pretty creepy. But I just wanted to call that out as something to keep in mind and to watch out for, because I think that's there's an extra effort that goes into that sort of thing that I think puts the cherry on top for enemies.
And it's another really good thing that does for games in general, and this is also true of the sort of weapon intros and things like that. But because basically that sword going through your chest, Alastair, is really just an intro to that sword. Where it goes through his body and he has to stand up and pull it out and all that. But what that does is it gives a hook to deliver character that may not be present in the enemies alone. Like without that, I mean, it's basically a wonderful use of smoke and mirrors to be like, oh, these things are like this.
Oh yeah, totally.
Even if the AI can't live up to that.
Yeah.
So the counterpoint for Republic Commando is that ours had to actually live up to what they could do. Even though you might miss them. So there's like trade-offs there, right? So, but here they're getting a ton of mileage out of these little, like the ram-headed or, skull-headed dude. I don't think his character when you're fighting him necessarily comes through.
Right.
Other than he can disappear into the wall, but, that actually just seems like we can make the player be confined to a small space and have a bigger space for the AI. Which just is a challenge for the player.
Yeah.
So I mean, it's just a great thing is that if a thing looks like the first time you see a thing, it has all this character, your assumption moving forward is it has that character. That's why you do introductions like this.
Right. Yeah, that's exactly what I mean. Yeah, and like for instance, those lizard guys that that I use as an example. They don't even really, during combat, they don't really burrow that much, right? And they don't get to emote that much because you're too busy. I mean, the trick is, to Brett's point, you don't want the combat telegraphing to get in the way of the character, right? So or vice versa. So you technically, you kind of need, you need those to be somewhat separate because you need to communicate their attacks, especially in a game like this where the tells are really important. That you don't want to miss them if you're trying to be really surgical about things. So they don't really always have time. Sometimes they do, but they don't always have time for emoting from a character standpoint. So you do that in the intros or, in some of these interstitials that, like Brett said, allows that character to come through. And then that's cemented in your head for the rest of it. So anytime you meet those guys, you have that persona that's in there, and it's sort of low-hanging fruit that I just think that a lot of times is not focused on enough. So,
and it's sometimes that can carry across any number of things. So, and I don't know if I brought up this example previously on the cast. I know I've talked about it elsewhere, and so has Todd Howard, an artist at Bethesda who had just started at the company when he was working on Fallout 3, made the Rad Roach, and he made it, 16,000 polys or something like that. And Todd came by and said, make it a tenth as many polys as that. And he was like, it's impossible, because he's an artist. Oh my God, you can't do that, whatever. Anyway, he managed to cut a fair number, nowhere near that, but he got it down to something acceptable. But it ended up working in the game's favor because it's the first enemy you see. And then your assumption, having seen an enemy that's this detailed, because it's how they teach you VATS and all of that stuff. So you're actually looking really closely at it. You're zoomed in, et cetera, et cetera. You also then assume that everything is that detailed because it's got such a strong intro. And your assumption is that all the enemies are as detailed as the rad roach is, which is not the case. So, it can work for you
in multiple,
any number of places, lots of different ways. Establishing a bulwark in the player's head of like, this is what the game is doing, even if it's not, is super important.
Yeah, you make a good point about the weapons too. I didn't think about the sword intro, which is good point, and we've tried to do that in the past ourselves as well. Not in the same vein, but as a quick aside, it's also hilarious when you get a new weapon and they have a little movie play that's just like that weapon firing or something, kind of. So they don't do it in engine, unfortunately, but when you get the grenade launcher or as they call it, the grenade gun,
sure,
of course they do. It's just this gratuitous firing of the weapons. You're like, wow, that's amazing, So again, that's to cement in your head that this is a super powerful, amazing weapon. And then when you fire it in game, it's pretty cool, but it definitely doesn't look like that video they played.
Right.
But again, to your point, it's all, we've kind of happened into an additional topic of like, cementing perception in players' heads for anything, really.
Yeah.
So you have that sense of awe the next time you see it or use it, despite it not living up to that introduction's, detail.
Yeah, and there's also gameplay communication there of like, oh, you're going to use this to do this sort of thing, maybe, or this enemy is going to do this sort of thing to you, and so it communicates that as well. One of the things Tim used to do when we worked together was at the end of a project, we'd have a little debrief, and he'd say, this is the thing that I think we could have done better. This is the one thing I wish you had been able to give me. And for Jedi Starfighter, I believe that was introing the weapons better as you were given them through the game. Because the first Starfighter basically had a primary and a secondary fire. But with the second game, we had multiple weapons per ship. And the player got them. Over the course of the game, they were added on, and we had no way of basically communicating that to the player. So not only did the player not know what to use, what this new ability was that they had, they did not know what situations it should be used under. So we kind of flubbed that one.
Yeah.
And paying attention to this game, which came out the year before, might have been a good choice to get there.
Yeah,
so.
I think it is a good example. I think, and there's also just the, even though I'm heralding these intros, I think the ideal that maybe hopefully I can state, overtly rather than people kind of pulling it out. Your ideal is to try to combine the intros with gameplay information as well. That's your best case scenario. And I would say that probably Nintendo is maybe one of the examples of good examples of that, right? Where the enemy intros or boss intros often show some of the mechanics or the things to look out for. And so that's like the ideal case. And to Brett's point, in Jedi Starfighter as an example of those, the importance of that, just even for the player to enjoy the gameplay. An example I'd use there that I always appreciated, that is sort of going above and beyond in the Blizzard way, and yes, drink, I said Blizzard. StarCraft 2, basically in a lot of the campaign missions in StarCraft 2, they would basically have one entire mission, which is in some cases an hour to 2 hours long, just focused on introducing you to a new unit, and the mission design's focused around it. And literally the whole mission is just kind of like about the identity of that. And so what ends up happening is because they introduce so many units throughout the game, most of the campaign is sort of like focused around celebrating this one unit, or gameplay style, or you could even equate that to a weapon, to your point in Jedi Starfighter. So, that's really hitting it home when it comes to that sort of introduction of a key feature.
Yeah, and I think that for them was an evolution from Warcraft 1 and 2, which did not really do that very well. And in the first StarCraft, of the missions I remember from that are the one where you get the ghost.
Yeah.
And it's maybe a little, some of those missions may be a little overlong, I think, in StarCraft, where you get those new mechanics. In particular, the ghost one is a little much. But it was a neat idea, and I can totally imagine, not having played StarCraft 2, I can imagine them evolving that really well.
Yeah.
And I know Warcraft 3, of course, focuses a lot on the heroes, so they're trying to do that there as well, and really showcase their characters and kind of move in the direction that they've come to as a company. So. So tying in a little bit with playing some Diablo as well, I think that's there in Diablo 3 too.
Diablo 3 for sure, and I think we saw some of the lack of it when playing Diablo 1, right? Things like the butcher just kind of running out of his room at you,
right?
And there's like not really much going on otherwise, so you're more afraid because you die instantly. That's how you find out his character, So
yeah, for sure. Anyway, all right. Well, that's I think that's a huge thing, and that's actually a real for this. This game does a fantastic job of all of that.
It's very focused on style, and kind of that sort of side of game development, which I definitely appreciate. And it sounds like from what I'm hearing about 5, they just have kept on that track and just keep going more over the top. And so,
yeah, I mean, it's really interesting to me when Japanese developers do something that's more in the vein of cool. Because this is a game that definitely is trying to be cool, right? And in a Western way. I always throw back to that. I forget the name of that game, Wendon. The rhythm game on the DS.
Yeah.
I forget the U.S. name. But they, we went to a talk where he was talking about the difference between Japanese kind of hot culture, where they have literal events where people go and watch cheerleaders on stage, right? And like it's not a cool culture a lot of the time, but they still admire the cool culture of the West, and when they go for it, they seem to do it better than we do. And I think that this is part of it. They're so celebrating the cool culture that they're trying to find something cool to do with everything they're bringing in. And I think that that's kind of what, maybe we don't do that enough, that we sort of associate that might even be the sort of hot aspect of their cool culture, right? Is that they're taking these cool things and they're trying to have a hot moment of like, this is why this is cool. Yeah. Rah, and be really excited about it.
It's very, very meta.
It is. Well, that's what it's like though. I mean, these games are just different that way.
Yeah. And I wonder what the perspective from the Japanese side, audience side is of this stuff. Are we? Because and Metal Gear is actually a good example for me on this, because Metal Gear, because I'm already a fan of sort of military espionage, everything anyway. In my life, right? Not just Metal Gear, but then Metal Gear's put through this filter, like you're saying, right? Of like, what is their sort of perception of that, and then you throw Kojima's, extra. X percentage of his own craziness on top of that. So it's even its own unique recipe. But you put this sort of, like you said, this sort of cultural touchstone of some kind, whether it be, military espionage or emo rock or whatever it is, I think Suda51 is another good example of somebody who puts that filter over things, right? And then takes a Western concept because he's so obsessed with the Western culture, and he puts it through his own filter. And then I'm interested, though we wouldn't be able to answer this, what a Japanese audience member is thinking of that filter. Do they still see it as cool when they put it through the filter? Or like you said, do they see it as sort of an external event, that there's more of a curiosity, the way that maybe we do sometimes? Like, what do they think of when we do a samurai game or a ninja game? Is it culturally appropriating, or is it cool, or what? Because who knows?
Do we find the right things to be cool? Right? I mean,
yeah.
There's a what's it? Ghost of Tsushima coming later this year.
Down the road, yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just curious about that as well as just like this. All right, of course, we've just had Sekiro out, and we'll talk about that later in the show and feedback. But there's definitely a question of like, do they find the right things, right? And that's the studio that did, sort of modern superhero game in Infamous and Infamous 2. And I'm like, well, I don't know. Are they the? Who knows? Like, I really don't. I don't know what to expect. From that game. Although the last year's demo or whatever was kind of cool looking. The stuff they showed at E3. So maybe they are finding the right thing. I mean, I'm a huge fan of Kurosawa and samurai movies generally, and I don't know. We'll see.
Yeah, that's a deep topic. There's a lot going on there that I hadn't anticipated talking about, but I do agree with you that Devil May Cry is a good example of that sort of that sort of question, about how that's all. They're definitely leaning into, like, just the one, I think, at the moment I mentioned last episode, because for me it sort of is exemplified by the moment the Black Knight snaps his fingers to open the door. It's a tiny moment, but it's sort of like you're just introduced to this thing, right? It's just big grandiose entrance through a mirror, and then you go fight him, and then then you find out sort of later that I think that's Sparta, so sort of like you were fighting the spirit of your dad. I don't know. We'll talk about the story maybe later, but I just love that he just snaps his fingers, in this very stylish way, and it just kind of like, what? It comes out of nowhere.
Well,
but then
I mean, he started as an image of you too, like of Dante rather, so
so
like that's what Dante would do.
That's what Dante
right?
would do, yeah.
To open the door.
Yeah, that's true.
So
that's fair.
I wonder. We don't really know what's going on there.
We're probably over talking this too. They probably didn't even think about all this stuff that hard. They'd be
like, well, we got to open this door. What do
Yeah. They just had a style they were going for, and they're like, I know he's going to snap his fingers. That's hilarious.
Yeah, you sort of see the pillar there. I mean, it's something we'll talk about in a couple episodes, but it's like the pillar is, all right, everybody on the team, like, gather around. We want to find cool, just a moment of cool for everything we do. So it doesn't matter what happens. It has to be cool the first time you see it happen, and they just kind of run with it. You can definitely see that being enough direction, I think, to get there. That's a great moment that you mentioned. I'm glad you brought that up, because it's totally like, and that's, you don't see that anywhere else, it's because of course Dante has to go and find all these, stupid objects around the castle in order to do the same things. So
right.
So that is funny.
And I think every time that Dante talks to a boss or a boss talks to Dante is another good example of that, right? I mean, Dante's always like talking smack whenever they talk to him. He's like, and it's like this giant eagle,
he's sassy,
giant spider, scorpion, fire thing, and he's just like, bring it on, whatever. He's just got this attitude that is just awesome and very specific. They definitely went for it, and to be honest, if you think about Capcom at the time with Resident Evil and a lot of the other stuff they were doing, it also kind of had its own identity within even the company, right? So they're definitely starting a course for a whole different style of thing that ended up spinning off, like we talked about, into Clover and Platinum and Bayonetta, and so
and the Capcom 5, because all of those games, I mean, especially you look at Beautiful Joe,
right,
or Piano 3. I mean, those are definitely games that are leaning into cool and an attitude that's very different from other Capcom products. So it is a super interesting time for that company in that short of 2-3 years of really interesting stuff, and also I think some of that stuff making its way back to Resident Evil as the franchise, and making that game a little bit more active as well, and less sort of ponderous, not always completely to its benefit. I think there's something to be said, having played Resident Evil 1, and I love Resident Evil 4, but I still think that, like, it took them a while to refine their footing from that, because I don't think 5 and 6 are particularly good. I haven't played a lot of 6. I played a fair amount of 5 and wasn't crazy about it.
It was a fun game that was tone deaf in a lot of ways, in my opinion.
Yeah. No, good. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other. So where was I going to go from that? There were. Yeah, I don't have a good seg, but I was sort of thinking, like, you're talking about like the different ways that he interacts with the bosses, and I was also thinking about the those mechanics where he's like, now he's got to race to get out of places.
Oh yeah. Mm-hmm.
So yeah, it's a weird thing. That's maybe the weirdest kind of transition, because that's not a cool thing necessarily, like to be under time pressure.
Mm-hmm.
That is a weird. I didn't know that was a thing in this game. I mean, like, I knew that there's generally time pressure in that, I think, and we'll talk about scoring maybe later this episode. But in general, I think it's better to get through these quicker. It's sort of like Doom in that way. Doom is like, if you can do the level in 30 seconds, that's the goal, to just like keep moving. But there's nothing that prevents you taking your time. Here, they dive right in and are like, oh no, now you only have 3 minutes to do this thing.
Mm-hmm.
How does that hit you?
Well, yeah, I mean, I think it's just dawning on me as you're saying that this is sort of like not a cool thing, as we sort of happened into that previous topic into now this, and to contrast those things. The thing that's dawning on me though on the fly that I didn't put in my notes is, to some degree, I can see the rationale, because they are trying to, in a way, teach you, like you said, how the game can be played, and that it's actually okay. And to your point, we think, though I still have neglected to look and see if the manual tells me this, we think that time is a variable for your ranking. And so if they're going to
I actually know that. I know that to be the case. I looked that up because I was curious. Like, how do you get an S rank? It's like, well, difficulty factors in how many times you get, how high your combo meter goes, factors in, and how quickly you can do a thing factors in.
Mm-hmm.
So it's all, to get an S rank is like, okay, well, do it on the highest difficulty, just nail all the combos and do it in under 6 minutes, or whatever.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I just think that they might be, this isn't a game where they want you to sort of slowly plod around, and so putting in. And this was also the era of timed levels, to be honest, and unfortunately, I feel like that was happening all the time. There might have even been a Resident Evil example where there's some bomb going off or something. Isn't it the end? Isn't there's you can,
yeah, you're right.
There's a
yeah.
I feel like there's a ticking bomb, and like Jill is locked up. I forget. There's some, or maybe that's in 2. I don't remember, but I just think it was kind of a bit of a trope. But it does as a way to encourage people to understand how this game can be played. Maybe that was where they're coming from, to put those sort of mechanics in, because it is, if you really embrace the speed and just embrace the not sweating the details and becoming just really fluid with it, as a lineage sort of example, that is the way I felt about Metal Gear Rising, which I really appreciated because it was such a contrast to Metal Gear Solid. It was just fun to play a character like Raiden, who was just all about speed and running and never stopping, and just kind of almost indestructible. And it was just kind of it was just good to be sort of, there's almost like a freedom to it,
Right. I mean, I want to mention, you mentioned take a drink for Blizzard, but I also take a drink when you said Metal Gear.
I think I've said it like,
and good Lord,
many times. Yeah, I'm sorry.
It's okay.
I will say
my liver will send you a bill.
I will say, of the 2 examples we've seen in this last episode, or maybe was it in the previous episode, because we've had one, I'm forgetting, there's two instances. One was the sphere. Yeah, so that would have been.
Yeah, they're both here. Yeah, they're both in this section.
This last section. Okay, I'm getting mixed up because I needed to beat the Black Knight again before starting this last session. Anyway, there's one that's just basically time based, and there's one that is eating your health away. And the only reason I prefer, even though I don't really prefer either of them, to be honest, in the core of their design, the health one at least gives you an avenue for increasing the time by having an analog addition, by picking up health or something like that, right? And in fact, in a couple places, they place health in your path when the spider's chasing you to up your health. So you're getting more time that way. So I thought that was an interesting tidbit, but it is weird for sure.
Yeah, it's a strange thing. I feel like I wasn't expecting it, but you make a good point in that might be sort of instructing the player as to what's the smart thing to do or how this game is meant to be played in general, and they're just kind of pointing that out to you. And this was the era of timed things. Like I remember that in particular, my favorite one that I was most angry with was in Jedi Knight, where there's the I forget the name of the ship, but it's like the prosecutor or something like that.
Yeah.
I don't know. Is that one of ours? But anyway, you have this crashing Star Destroyer, and you have to on the hard mode. I couldn't believe this when I only knew this because I worked at LucasArts, but I asked, like, what were they thinking setting this time? And they just took the fastest time anybody in QA had done it and subtracted 10 seconds.
That's funny.
It's the worst. What were they thinking?
I laugh as a maniacal game developer.
Jeez. I was trying to. That was the only time in that game that I used some cheat to get to the next level. I was like, "Are you kidding me?"
Yeah.
So, yeah, it was bad.
I don't think that was Reed's level. I forget whose it was.
Yeah, I don't know who whose that level was, but
could have been Matt's.
It was awful.
Could have been Tadaishi's, who we've had on the podcast.
Oh, I would have taken him to task as my favorite and my least favorite Star Wars game moment.
Yeah, right. Don't remember.
The number of times I tried to get through that. Oh my god.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, I mean that was a thing at the time for sure.
I think unless time mechanics like this are really heavily integrated into the game systems and features and mechanics, they don't often work well. It's just unless the game is really based around that concept. And an example is escaping me right now, and I'm sure people are thinking of some. There's one on the tip of my tongue.
Well, I mean, there are whole genres about speed. I mean, racing games, obviously, right? I mean, there are whole genres where it's like, can you do this? How fast can you do this?
Yeah,
thing? And
I'm thinking even more character games, that tend to be like combo based or like riffing off of things, and sort of you're just chaining things together and you're like managing your time. But anyway.
Well, I mean, so there's some of that in Diablo 3, for example, to take a really modern example. I mean, less than 10 years, because that's got sort of the combos that you pick up. There's a couple different ways. You have like sort of kill streaks, and kill streaks are maybe a good example that even go back that far to any sort of game. Because even like an Unreal Tournament or Quake 3 Arena or what have you would have had timers in there that were hidden, but there were, if you can keep getting kills, you get these kill streaks, and they are time based. They sort of wear off, but every time you get another kill, you reset the timer, so you have a chance to get another one. And Diablo has that in a couple of different ways. One is with like the double damage things. One is the shrines, and then I guess the other thing would be just in general, you get an XP buff from killing lots of enemies if you can just keep that streak going. And there's a image on the screen of like a rope burning or something like that. Welcome back from our unintentional break. We had a little bit of a technical issue there, a little bit of a drop connection. We wanted to move on to talk about the sort of mission structure of the thing, which I think is interesting and important, and will maybe lead into my other topic for the evening. But why don't you take that away? This was really your topic.
Yeah, I mean, so we talked in the first episode about some of the lineage coming from Resident Evil, and in fact the story of how it started as a Resident Evil game, etc. And as Brett pointed out, as he was sort of doing some of the experimentation that he'll talk about in a second, the world generally is similar to a Resident Evil world in that it is technically semi-cohesive and that you can go back and forth between rooms and loads and doors and things. But within that, they felt the need, and we can talk about why we think that is and how it impacts the game, to put in that mission structure, which essentially gives you an objective at the beginning of the level, basically an objective like other objective games, like go and do this mission. They call them missions instead of quests or something, though you have that objective, and then you're graded by the end of it based on how you do, like we said earlier before break, of like time or how your combos work or what have you. And then at those breaks are really the only times that you can save the game for the most part. And it's, well, actually not even for the most part. It's literally the only times that it really, whenever you die, you start back at the beginning of those missions, the last save that you have. And so it takes this world that is sort of Resident Evil in structure based on Resident Evil 1 or 2 or something, but then puts these mission breaks in the middle of them. So if you play it sort of linearly, in a way like I am doing, as opposed to how Brett was doing it, you don't really even get a sense of the cohesion of the world. It just feels like a big linear game. And it just, I don't want to say that it's fully arbitrary, but it does feel like a weird structure to put into the game so far, because of that feel. I don't know if you feel the same, but I guess I kind of like having a report of how I did, and we've been talking about it the whole time, really, in both episodes so far. That clearly the sort of the mastery of the game is important to them, so they wanted probably these points in time where they can actually say you finished, quote unquote, finished a mission and then grade you on it. So maybe that's some of the motivation, but it's definitely odd to have it sort of, I don't want to say square peg round hole, but it's definitely an interesting combination of world and mission structure, especially with your discovery. But what are your thoughts?
Right. Yeah. I mean, I would say that basically this is a game that might teach me to be a better lead. Frequent feedback, telling you exactly where you are. No, I mean, I think that probably is the really underlying core of it, is that they have a few values. One is cool factor of those combos. Another is difficulty, and another is speed. And those are the things that are most important to them. And they're basically just telling you every under 10 minutes, presumably, if you're playing well, that you're doing well or not at achieving those goals. And I do think we talked about the time sections a little bit, that is one way to sort of teach you like that's important. Obviously the combos are important because they give you the, dull, I don't remember what C is, crazy maybe, bravo, astounding or amazing and stylish, right? They give you those sort of racing game style ranks, right? I mean, Gran Turismo has D through S, I think. Or maybe it's not D, maybe it starts at B, but or C. But it's very much akin to that. It definitely seems to borrow from racing games, so it's a pretty clear, like, oh, okay, I know what DCBAS mean. I'm good. I'm down with that. So that's kind of obvious. But without breaking it into sort of manageable chunks and telling you every so often this is what's going on, I don't think that would come across. I mean, it wouldn't come across at all, really. I mean, take your time with a Resident Evil game. Unless you're playing on a modern system which has achievements and things like that, none of that matters. And then if you do play on that, you can go and look. And this is true of like a Metal Gear as well. Metal Gear Solid 3 maybe was the first one with it, or...
with what?
I'm trying to remember. No, that was what I was going to say with trophies, but I think that was still PlayStation 2. So
originally PlayStation 2, yeah.
Yeah, and I played it that way, so I'm not sure why I thought of that one. But anyway, they do give you this sort of feedback of, well, actually though, so then one of the things that thing does, and those games did, was to have those rankings with the animal and things like that.
Yeah, I mean, ranking the player wasn't, that wasn't a new thing. It just many games had at least ranking screens you could go to, at certain points, but it's not. They definitely chose to integrate it into the literal flow of the game in this case, in an era when it wasn't maybe as common. We're focused a lot on 3D games, but I'm sure there's some examples from a lineage perspective I can't think of right now, even in 2D, right, and on the SNES and NES that probably was doing similar stuff that they might be riffing off of. I'm trying to think if Castlevania never did something like that, or some game like that. I guess those Metroidvanias wouldn't do that, but
yeah, not as much. Although there is, I mean, you go back to Metroid, that if you do that game quickly enough, she reveals that she's a girl. Actually, she reveals more than that. Just kind of more explicit. The faster you can do that game. So it is part of that lineage. But it is, at that point, it's taken in total, right? And not in this piecemeal chapters. Way, which is strange.
Yeah, more talking about chapters that I feel like there's probably some examples we're not thinking of back in those days, but doesn't Resident Evil at some point also have like chapter ends where, am I misremembering that too?
Yes, it does. Some of them do.
Yeah. So there's something in there, but I think your point about the mastery topic is really the key here, in that, and we'll probably talk about it because of time. We'll talk about it more next episode. But the combo system and the way that how deep it gets, especially because you can kind of spec yourself out based on what abilities you're buying. Like when you really, and I'm starting to get better at it. I don't think I'll become a master at this game, but I do feel myself getting better. When you start investing in those and spending time learning those, you want to be graded and rewarded on them, right? You want to see that there's, of course, the gratification of just finishing an enemy fast or going through that, your intrinsic gratification of that. But having sort of the game come back at certain junctures and tell you that you're succeeding and that you're doing better and better, that's a very overt way, an extrinsic way to tell the player, but at least it's that feedback, right? So I think if you have a deep system like it seems like they have, once you have all these different weapons with all these different abilities, if you really get good at the game, I think it's an interesting correlation to have a very clear way to understand how well you're doing. I'm really interested, because this is both of our first Devil May Cry game. I'm really interested to see what structure they use for like 5, and see if they keep anything like that. I'm sure they grade you, but do they have mission breaks, or how does it work?
Yeah, and I mean, I think that part of one of the things that lends itself to this style of play is actually the save system, where you have multiple slots.
Yeah.
Because you have 10 slots or whatever to save as you're going, rather than just automatically saving, which would be what is common today, you have that opportunity to basically experiment, because you'll say, you know what, I just finished this mission, I got a D. Let me go ahead and save that, just so that if I want to progress from here, I can. And then it's easy enough to just, machines reset super quickly back then. I'm just going to reset, go right back in and give it another go. Get right back into the game and try that one mission again. I really flubbed this boss fight, or, whatever, I didn't do this well, or I wonder if I can get the stylish there. Maybe I need to buy a different ability. Like, there's a million different ways that you can customize at that point. And so I think that it rewards the player who is interested in that sort of thing, who gets a rank. I mean, and there's a lot of us out here who get that rank C or D and go, oh man, I can do better than that. That's not me, right? Especially at this time, I would have been that kind of player in 2001. If I had played this game in 2001, I would have been coming in super tired every morning, because not only did I have very young children, I would have been staying up all night, like trying to figure out how to get past this stuff and to do better at it.
Right.
And I mean, I'm still, I'm still a guy who gets a challenge, and it's like, oh, I can get 1, 2, or 3 stars on this level, and how do I get the 3 stars?
Yeah.
How much time I spent on pit droids.
Yeah. Oh no, there's many examples in your life of this happening. You're in the middle of a Kingdom Hearts fiasco as well. So,
and another game that I'm spending a lot of time with that I'll reveal in a future episode.
Okay, all right,
a teaser,
no mystery. Ooh. I like it. So how? But this structure does segue into your other topic, which I think is relevant to talk about when it comes to dealing with difficulty. So what's that all about?
Yeah. So my expectation from the mission structure was, and part of this I think is because I'm a programmer and I just think like, how do you optimize loading and things like that. But I looked at this and said, oh, there's these missions. That means I'm just getting chunk after chunk of the castle that I'm in, and I can only go there. But I was streaming it, and somebody said, "Oh, you could go back." I was like, "What?" Because I had missed some stuff. For example, there are little blue orb chips or whatever that you can get 4 of them and turn into a full orb and get another.
Health, yeah.
What do you get for that?
You get a health
or something.
You get your bar goes up. Bar gets your health.
Oh, your devil does your devil trigger bar go up? Maybe
no,
that blue orbs.
No, I think that's a separate upgrade.
That's the purple orb.
Yeah, yep.
Yeah. Okay. Anyway, you can get those and your health goes up. And I certainly could use some of that. I got to the point of the what boss was it now? I told you in pre-show, and now I'm like, what?
The cow skull guy.
Oh right, yeah, the skull demon thing in the robe. I could not get past that to save my life, and I ended up going back to the initial hallway where the scorpion chases you down, in order to go through that, go to the room before, which has a ton of marionettes, and back and forth, basically kind of going in and out in kind of a channel of rooms. There's also a place where you can purchase upgrades near there. So I basically ended up grinding to get an additional yellow orb, an additional blue orb, and an additional vital star, which is the health, to refill your health. And maybe even also a purple orb to increase my devil, my devil trigger.
Yeah, I need to do more of that one in particular.
Yeah, and so what I found myself doing is, and it's funny because I was repeating this stuff over and over again. I actually got pretty good at fighting those battles. I'd know when I come back into this room, from this room, I'll get the marionettes will appear over here. So I need to run over there and bash them, but I know where they're all going to appear. And I found I was actually getting a lot of stylishes in the combats and things like that. So even though I spent a huge amount of time grinding, I mean, like 40 minutes, which is an eternity in the sense of these missions, I actually found that I got, I think, my highest ranking on that particular mission, which ended up being a B. I didn't die because I had died.
Deaths,
I think deaths are probably part of the formula. I failed on time entirely, but I had a ton of stylishes and et ceteras, and I managed to get through that boss battle. So yeah, I mean,
it's just,
it didn't even occur to me that was. I mean, of course, part of that is we made a game that had missions, and it was literally a different level we loaded every time. It was,
it's
back to the
it's structured that way though, and not until this last session when you get to the drawbridge puzzle and that kind of stuff, it kind of dawns on you that you've actually been to some of these rooms before. You know what I mean? And it actually is. There's a couple spiral staircases that that bring you back to where you started, and you're going out the way you came in, and and so it doesn't really encourage you to do that unless you have, again, the other sub point that you're making with the world structure is that you went back and you started to grind like you would in sort of like an RPG, right? And that that is something I did not anticipate having in this game at all. So that's a whole nother weird addition, and then you can also
it's a super departure from Resident Evil too, where the resources are super limited, where grinding is very, very bad, because if you end up having to use some of those resources, you can't get more. There's only so many. But here, because the resources drop from the enemies,
right,
it's okay.
Right.
So
well, not only that, you mentioned a small thing you mentioned that I want to pull the thread on is that the upgrade stations are in various places. So if you can go back, you can grind anywhere and then go and upgrade yourself anytime you want. You know what I mean? And there's usually one nearby. So that's another sort of breaking of the model in a way. There were typewriter rooms, of course, but not until 4, were you doing, right? 4 was the first time we sort of like, couldn't you upgrade your guns and things? And like your inventory, maybe. Anyway.
Yeah, I don't remember
the guy with his trench coat.
It's been a while. But, what you buy?
Yeah, you're one of your favorite lines. Don't say it. It creeps me out every time. Anyway, yeah.
If I had only known that.
Oh, well, I revealed that on air. Great. It's just some of these breaking of the mold that they're doing here is really interesting. That I'm sure those tendrils, spread around throughout different other games in the future. So.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny though, because his next game, I think, was Beautiful Joe, and it's definitely not there, and it's not in Bayonetta either. So this is
and I didn't
an
even
outlier.
mean his. I just meant the concept of we mentioned God of War earlier, right? Which is the game after this had orbs, had upgrade trees, right? It was still character action, different camera, but it had combos, right? And different weapons you got and stuff. So there's a lot of that in here.
Yeah. No, that's very true. And I mean, that thing has multiple sort of economies and things like that. But but fundamentally, I think there's definitely a similarity there. It was just weird. Somebody had to point out to me that, you could just go, to that other room if you want. I'm like, what? Because I literally expected it would just be locked behind me. It's funny. I've been playing Alpha Protocol in my sort of weekday streams, and there's a game that frequently you just cross a spot where it's like, you can't go back now. And I'm not really sure why. I'm sure there's some. Actually, I'm not even sure. I mean, I guess that's a game where you want to make decisions and they have to stick. So maybe that's kind of what they make that reflected in the level design as well. Yeah, it's not an exploration game, and if you didn't explore it, it's too late. You missed your chance. And it's pretty well telegraphed, I think. But my definite expectation going into this game was entirely because they called them missions.
Yeah,
was we're giving you a chunk of game to play. You can spend as much time as you want in those rooms that are in this chunk, but that's the whole chunk. And it was a complete mental barrier that I was helpfully helped over.
Missions are not sort of spatial in a way, right?
Right, exactly.
They're like event based and temporal or something. It's like, well, if you're playing a later mission, you can just go. Well, I know there's one point like the castle's cut off to us right now, but it looks like from the level list that we eventually go back to it. But
I'm sure we will.
Hypothetically, you could play a later mission and go back to the same places that you were in earlier missions and still fight similar enemies. And it's just such a weird, interesting thing. So, break the mold.
Yeah. I mean, it's like I said, partly it's because I'm a programmer and I just thought that that's what they would do based on their design. Like, maybe they designed it this way so they only have to load this much, because the loads are fairly fast to go through doors. It's not like, and granted, I'm playing on the PS3 remaster.
They're fairly fast for me.
You. Yeah. But it doesn't have that Resident Evil. I'm going to play a 10-second movie of a door opening in in space,
right?
In some abstract space to deal with. So it's. There is definitely a sense to which I was like, okay, this is this chunk, and that's what could fit in memory, and that's how they chunked it up. So it was a real revelation to find that wasn't true, and I was very happy that I could go back and find blue orb chips to put together and get a set of 4 as well. So,
did you feel the grinding helped you then? Or you feel more powered up?
Yes, I'm not. It's not so much that I'm. So one of the things that I think is really helpful about grinding is that having done it once, I feel like you find the equilibrium where, okay, now the game is pitched at the right difficulty for me. And that's the thing I've always appreciated about a JRPG. I mean, even playing, Kingdom Hearts that you mentioned earlier on Proud Mode, I spent a lot of time at the beginning grinding in a safe space, way too much, a ridiculous amount. But then for the rest of the game, for the most part, it was pitched at the right difficulty level for me. That it never was so difficult I couldn't continue. And I think that that's a real risk in certain difficult games, that you get to points where it's just, I'll never do this. This is, I can't.
Exit
you
points.
know, it's impossible for me to, and there's no other thing to do. You know, and I think some games are like that. And this one gave me an ability to seek out my equilibrium. I knew how I was failing, and I added a yellow orb just to get multiple bites at the apple, but I ended up not needing it. So I could have foregone that. But being able to buy another vital star and a little bit more health gave me the opportunity to I basically found the level where it's like, okay, I can play at this level. You've been actually having an easier time of it than I have. So
well, I'm not on. I think we've been kind of swapping. Like you said, you had an easier time on the eco boss, and I had a harder time on that one. But then other ones you had a hard time. So it feels like it's about even. But I definitely feel like I early on I had some, basically trial by fire fights, like the first Phantom for sure, but then the Tiger Ghost, Black Ghost thing. The Black Knight, actually, I failed quite a few times on that. But what it's been doing, as we've talked about, is sort of one of the points of this kind of game is it's hardening me, right? I'm forcing myself to use certain skills that I wouldn't normally. Like when we played God of War, I basically mashed the whole game, but here
sure. So did I.
I'm holding R1 down, and I'm using that quite a bit, almost exclusively, to make sure that I'm rolling and I'm dodging and and then hitting double trigger at the right time, and I'm using all the tools, which is what they would want. And so I do feel accomplished because of it. But I haven't done the grinding, so I think I'm definitely dying more often. I'm dying more times on a given boss than you are, for sure. You're typically better at these games than I am as well. So you've had some.
I don't know that I've played enough of them to be able to say that, but I don't know. I mean, I do think that we're both getting to an age where these sorts of games are difficult for us. Just period. Like, I mean, I literally just don't have the reaction times that I used to have.
Yeah.
And there's a lot more muscle memory work that I feel like you have to do at a certain point.
Yeah.
And some games are more forgiving of those than others.
I definitely appreciate games that give you, not that I'm super clever all the time, but giving you some alternate ways to accomplish goals than just the Twitch skill. These days.
Yeah, no, I think that this game's mission structure, to talk about that again, is it lends itself to that. Like, oh, I didn't manage it that way. How about if I bought this other thing? Maybe if I power up the sword in this way, or maybe I should try this other weapon I have. I haven't tried the grenade gun, but I've used the shotgun a ton. And you in pre-show we were talking about a section where I didn't really have any trouble at all. In fact, I'd completely forgotten about it because it wasn't difficult for me. But I had somebody on the stream telling me, "Oh, the shotgun's really good for those."
Yeah,
and I went, "Oh, okay." And I paused and I went to the items and switched out to the shotgun, and now that's what I use most of the time.
Yeah. In fact, I think the irony of that is you get the shotgun in the room that they're introduced. The banshees are introduced. So that's an interesting corrorelation there that I wonder if that's a theme that they. I just thought of that, but I wonder if that's a theme that they continue because you get the grenade gun in that water room for the drawbridge, and there were no enemies in there. But anyway, and the save system and the retry system is forcing me to experiment as well. Like because I die so much and I have to start over from a save. I end up just trying to buy different, and of course I have the same amount of orbs, because I haven't spent them yet as I did the last time. So then I'll try to buy different things to see if it helps. So it's allowed me to sort of, in a weird way, explore the upgrade system when I normally wouldn't do that. I would just sort of focus on a certain way to upgrade. But here I'm like trying different things out. And then ultimately I have to stick with whatever I tried last if I complete the mission. So it's a little bit weird way to upgrade yourself. But I can't really do it with much intent, I guess. But anyway.
Yeah. Well, because I'm a glutton for punishment, I also picked up Bayonetta 1 and 2 for the Switch.
Oh, yeah, for Switch, that's a good idea.
Yeah, I'm thinking about giving those a try, getting another go at it. Since we're playing this sort of game right now, just to take another look, reappraise, kind of push aside some of the storytelling's super weird in this game. Because I did think the combat was quite good, but I hadn't really played a game like this at least in a long time, if ever. I can't even remember what my first kind of game like this would have been. And so playing Bayonetta, I was just like, oh, this is just too hard for me. And the story stuff is wacky. Maybe not for me. But I am very curious because it has I got both the first and the second. And the third is coming, I think, this year. So it's a series that people love, and I'm curious to see more of it. So
well,
we'll see how that goes.
A little bit, like very, very tangentially related. As a quick update, we talked about your Kingdom Hearts obsession. I'm still on my Diablo 3 obsession, and I did want to give an update on a letter maybe that we had at one point. I am now up into the torment difficulties, and and kind of pretty, getting pretty, because I'm trying to finish the season content and stuff, and so it forces you to do some of that stuff. But I'm like level 50 Paragon or something like that. So I'm well beyond, the end game there, or I'm into the end game.
What is Paragon?
So what Paragon
That's
is
separate from levels, right?
Yeah. Once you get to 70, you level cap, you then start leveling up these Paragon levels, which give you additional statistical points to use, and like adding to dexterity or your armor or something like that. And that apparently goes up to into 800s.
Oh,
yeah.
Whoa.
Yeah, I guess it becomes ineffective.
So it becomes like power levels in Destiny or something like that.
Exactly. Yeah,
it's where it's like it just kind of goes maybe eternally.
Yep. Or like faction rep in WoW, or prestige, right? Yeah. In COD, it would be sort of equivalent to the prestiging. So once you level cap, you can start all over. It's just a way to elongate the game. So I don't think I'll get up to 800. But my point is, we talked about how the bosses are sort of just bullet spongy. But man, once you start getting into the torment levels, and I have everything leveled up other than my Paragon stuff, the bosses definitely get more interesting. And a lot more, there's still a lot of damage that they take, but you definitely have to positioning's a lot more important. So it's not as interesting as these bosses are in this game, but they're definitely not slouches like they were before. And I think we had a letter about that.
Yeah, no, we definitely did. And
the game changes at that level, in the torment levels.
I think that's true of any game that has a more difficult mode, like a new game
Hopefully,
plus, or and I mean, I've talked about how Kingdom Hearts on a harder level of difficulty is different, and it forces a focus on you. And with Diablo, I think there's still the opportunity to maybe grind. I don't know how you can choose difficulty basically at any time, right? You can just sort of end what you're playing and drop down if it's too hard.
You can grind
a bit.
Yeah, you can grind on an easier level and then be more prepared for the upper levels. But at some point, you have to,
Yeah, you have to. Well, you're never going to get through it if you don't. How long do those seasons last?
I forget the average. I feel like it's 3 months or 4 months, maybe.
Okay.
This one,
so you have a chance.
This one I think is longer. Yeah, I'm close. I think I'll finish, but I'm gonna just squeak by, finishing the sort of the challenges that they give you. But it's definitely taking a lot of time. But you feel like a total badass in that game at that point because you're just so much going on.
I can imagine. Yeah, it's a lot. There's a lot. I mean, even just dipping into it again on stream with you, I was remembering, I'm playing a wizard. I already played a wizard up to, a very high level, with my son. And remembering like, oh yeah, you can sort of build your build around like things you pick up or what have you. So yeah,
it's fun. Yeah. It's good. Anyway, just a quick
a quick update on Diablo. Well, since we're talking about difficulty, it's a perfect time to turn to feedback. We only have a single email this time, no reviews, although we'd love to have those. So if you could, direct yourself, if you haven't before, and give us a review or even a singing review, please include the song which you're parodying or paying homage to, and I will sing it on the air. But you have an email to devgameclub@gmail.com from Darren.
Okay.
Why don't you go ahead?
All right. The subject is difficulty debate from Darren. Hi guys. I wondered if you two guys would mind weighing in on the current debate raging across the internet regarding difficulty in games, which was triggered by the recent release of From Software's latest game, Sekiro. Sekiro? I think that's how you say it. Sekiro, right. I can see both sides. On one hand, I'm all for accessibility in games and want as many people as possible to enjoy my favorite hobby. I can also understand that not every game needs to be for everyone. Having an easy mode in From games would certainly take away the immense sense of triumph when beating a boss or the game. I've heard some people say that that sense of accomplishment has impacted their lives and given them confidence and fortitude to push through some difficult times. People say that having an easy mode wouldn't take that away, but it could. I don't think I'm disciplined enough to keep playing on hard after hours of struggling against the same boss. I would flip it to easy and finish the game. But since that wasn't an option, I kept at it and persevered. Thoughts? Love the show, Darren.
Yeah. So difficulty in games. I mean, I have a lot to say about this. One is the accessibility issue. And that is an important one because you have to realize just coming to a game that not everybody starts at the same place that you do. And that's not a they haven't played as many games as I have. I mean, that's literally they can't do what I can do.
Yeah.
There are people who I'm a person who's happy with a game at 30 frames per second because I can't see games being better at 60. Like, I just don't have the hardware. I never have. It's never bothered me. There are people who are like, I can totally tell the difference. I can't. I just literally can't. My brain doesn't perceive images as fast or something, like whatever that is. So that's a thing. And of course, that variance is quite wide when you come to physical ability. I mean, that's not just perceptual ability. It's literally like your twitch reflexes are not as fast as other people. So there's that. You're not starting from an even playing field. There's another part of this that it's hard to know how to say this, but it's so I look at reading. Reading is not mechanically difficult. Once you know how to read, you get a better vocabulary, et cetera, et cetera. Everybody presumably who can read can get to the same levels of reading. But it's still more difficult to read War and Peace than it is to read Captain Underpants. That's just a fact, right? I mean, there's a lot going on there. And it takes a certain amount of mental hardware. Yes, I have boys.
I couldn't wait to hear what your contrast to the War and Peace was going to be. So
yeah,
you didn't disappoint. So thank you.
That's a pretty wide disparity. Or comic books or what have you.
Hey, no. All right.
Well, I'm not dismissing the value of any of that across that whole spectrum. But there's a mechanical edge to that, et cetera, which is just I can functionally read. Versus I can grasp the content, make the connections, et cetera, that are required to read deeply.
That's why reading comprehension is a part of testing, right? The whole separate aspect of it. Can you grok? Yeah.
Yeah. And here's the thing. I think that also exists in games and we never talk about it. There are games that have mechanical simplicity, and I've worked on one in Tacoma, and that game has a lot of perceptual difficulty in terms of making those connections and finding the things in the environment, which is slightly mechanical, but reading them and actually making the connections there is difficult. And Gone Home had stuff in it that I perceived playing it that a lot of people didn't. And I can remember Steve Gaynor coming out and saying, oh yeah, this was a story that we were trying to tell, but we didn't want to foreground it too much. And you had to make the connections.
Obra Dinn, I haven't played it, but it sounds like a sort of a similar example.
Absolutely. Although I think there they definitely meld it more mechanically as well, because you have to make the connections. Well, there's some guesswork that you could do, I suppose, but fundamentally the game is about
interpretation connections. You mean?
Yeah, making those interpretive connections. Yeah. And then on the third hand, if I had that many hands like Zaphod Beeblebrox, to make another literary reference, I think that From Software benefits a lot in commercially by not doing more accessible options to their games. It's what they're known for. These are the impossible games. These are the super hard games. These are games that people stream doing impossible things in on top of the already impossible game that they have. And I think that that's a huge benefit to them. And that's somewhat cynical on my part, that it's not so much about art as it is about commerce at that point, rather. That, I mean, they sold 2 million copies of that game in the first 10 days or something like that. And that would probably not be the case if not for this now 10-year history or so of these games, the Souls games primarily, and then Bloodborne as well, of just like these are the mountains. These are the Everests that you have to climb if you're a true gamer.
So you're saying that if they had an easy difficulty, they would have sold less?
I'm saying that because they have only this one way to be measured against, we talk about them more than we would.
Yeah, right.
How would that translate to sales? I don't know. I mean, we can't know. But I do feel like they're banking on, you know what, we could spend this effort and it would water down our game. And I'm putting myself in their shoes now. I don't think that that's true. I'm with Patrick Klepek and saying an easy mode has never ruined a game. So I do think literally the wheel of game criticism discourse turns on this particular issue literally every time a Souls or Bloodborne or now Sekiro comes out. I mean, literally every time it's like, oh, let's talk about hard games now, with a couple other outliers like Super Meat Boy or Celeste. Celeste, on the other hand, added some accessibility options. They said, you know what, some of our audience would like to experience our story, which is important to us, and we'll dial back the difficulty. We'll add options for those people. Super Meat Boy never did. I think there's also in the early Souls games, I think there is perceptual difficulty. Keza McDonald and Jason Killingsworth wrote a book about the crazy lore that you can get from reading all the item descriptions and piecing things together of the Souls series. So I think it actually also has that, at least in those games. But I don't think that the game would be in any way ruined by letting more people play it or letting more people finish it. But I it's their right to do. I'm also on the side of the artist here. You're making your game. Make your game. So I don't know. Those are all of the thoughts I think I have on this issue. The only thing I did say, and I wrote a blog post about this recently, is don't go out there and on people on the internet. Pardon my explicitness on the cast. Don't go out there and just pile on somebody because they used some cheat thing on PC to get through the game. It's fine. Yeah, it's on the PC. That's a thing that can happen.
It's not worth it. Yeah, don't.
It's no. I mean, no reason. Spend your life in some positive way, please.
Yeah.
Anyway.
Yeah. I mean, there's another pretty famous company that is notoriously never has difficulty levels in their games. A little company called Nintendo. For the most part, most of their games never have difficulty selections. And so they have different goals in mind when they do that, right? They're trying to make, in their game designs, they keep that in mind and try to make games that various people can play and have analog difficulty sort of built into the game, and opt-in nature of it. But some of the early games, especially the 2D Marios, they just it is what it is. You just get better at it, and we played one of those on the podcast. But I don't. I think you sort of argued various sides of it, so I'm not sure where. It sounds like you sort of land that if that's their goal, if that's the goal that they want to go after, then that's okay. And I agree.
Yeah, I mean, there are so many games. I just have a hard time being too upset because there are so many games.
I applaud. Maybe it's because I'm a game developer and that you are as well. And are in an artistic medium, and that's what I've done even before I was doing game development. And I do always appreciate somebody sticking to the sort of guns that they have set out for themselves. And I do think it has garnered them success, but there have also been hard games that have been bad games as well.
Sure.
So they are doing a good job at making a hard game. And I think for me, Darren's last sentence where he said, but since that wasn't an option, speaking about having an easy mode, I kept at it and persevered. So I'm taking from that he got through it. And that, I think, is a powerful sentence. And I think whether they are creating a debate for the debate's sake, which they probably aren't, they're just trying to make a game that they want to make. We talk about Dark Souls and Dark Soulsian things on this podcast more than many other things, despite my efforts about talking about Metal Gear. And there's a reason, because they focused on what they were doing. They brought back a sort of mentality that games, I think, had really lost. And I'm partially, I'm guilty of this as well, right? Because many of the games I've worked on have been sort of broad audience games, right? So you do want the most number of people to have accessibility to them.
Yeah, I wouldn't say guilty.
Well, okay, yeah. I mean, it's been a choice, right?
And guilt is very negative.
Okay.
Fair
enough. Well,
I mean, I only point that out because I think that that's part of the conversation we have here, because people who've been playing games since the 80s or whatever went through the hell, playing some of those games and how difficult they were. And now it's a badge of honor. And I don't think that's necessary.
I see.
I mean,
yeah, that's fair.
These are things that we spend our spare time in to be entertained by.
Yeah.
Right? But, at the same time, I could read Captain Underpants or I could read War and Peace, right? I mean,
that wasn't my intent. I didn't intend for it to be negative. I just
No, I know. But so often it is, right? I mean, so often that's how we describe it.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, that it's a baby game because it's got this sort of watered down aspect to it, right? Or something like,
I would say Gone Home is not a baby game.
Yeah.
No, on one axis,
it just has another.
Yeah, fault. Sure. Mechanically, there's not a lot, but to really understand what's going on in that game, you need to know a lot of stuff. You need to read between the lines. It's not a baby game.
Yeah, different axis, different filter, different goals.
Yeah,
right? Different accomplishment, different output. Different revelations, and that's why it's an exciting time. And I think that's why I applaud From Softwares, however super intentional they are about it. I mean, they've become this, maybe they're leaning into it more than ever, but with Demon Souls or what have you, they started off that way. And they made, Kingsfield, and they have previous games where they were dabbling in this area. So this isn't like,
it's not new.
They've had these goals as a company, it seems like. And I applaud that commitment, and I think that now people know what they're getting themselves into, and I think it's okay. It's like, well, you don't have to play it, and you can say, I'm bummed I won't get to see it, but as Darren said, he persevered, and that's an experience that only video games can give you.
Sure,
and I really appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I do think there is the distinction here, and it's a hard thing to get over, is that literally different people have different abilities physically coming to play games.
Yeah. Yep.
And so that's a very hard thing to work around, that this game is going to push you to those limits, regardless of who you are, when you start. If you literally can't. And actually, I mean, I wanted to mention, Microsoft, who is your
I was just going to mention
employer more or less, is has done pioneering work in the last year with their accessible controller. Just amazing work. Because that thing's fantastic. I have absolutely no need of it myself, but I am so glad that it exists. And that it enables people who have different abilities to play the games. The most touching thing out of the Super Bowl this year for me, which I didn't watch, was that commercial. And seeing a bunch of kids who couldn't play games, and Nathan Martz had talked about this with Once Upon a Monster, that used the Kinect, that he went and saw some disabled children, and they were able to play this game because they could do sort of gross motor motion but not fine motor motion, because of their unique disabilities, and what a huge impact that had on him for them to be able to enjoy Sesame Street interactively like other kids could. So
I mean, I'm not as educated as I should be in this area, but it is a goal of ours, and I can't speak for people who have those accessibility challenges, but I guess the thing that I do like about the initiatives that Microsoft is pushing and others is, I mean, I think the direction it seems like you'd want to go is to allow anybody who wants to take on the challenge to play a From Software game, just give them the ability to do so via other inputs and stuff. Yes, inaccessible with the traditional, whatever the default, controller that comes with the system, but change that, and challenge the industry to allow anybody to take on this challenge if they want to.
I mean, there's other parts of it because, of course, there's timing and things like that. Again, that literally there are some, and we brought it up in connection with this game is like, I don't know if I can do this game.
Fair enough.
That literally, I mean, when I say that, I'm like, 20 years ago, I'm sure I could play this game, because I was young and my hands worked. But now I just wonder. I don't know. I mean, I think I'll be okay with this game in particular. But I played Demon's Souls, and yes, I beat it, and boy, was that hard. And if I were not working at the time, I don't think I could have. I mean, honestly. I go back and forth on it. I do support creators to make their creative decisions. I hate if those are super capitalism inflected.
I'm just not sure. And
I've
I challenge you on that point, that I'm not sure that that's really their motivation.
I don't know. And what I've said, when people have asked me, I think somebody asked me this on the stream. It was like, you know what? I haven't heard from Software or Miyazaki on this. That's his name, right? Miyazaki. I haven't heard from them and what their goals are and why they've made this choice. I'm just saying, as an outsider, this is the game we talk about. Whether it's the Souls series or Bloodborne or Sekiro, those are the games we talk about, and it comes up every time they release a game.
Well, I think again, like to echo what I said at the beginning, I think that's twofold though. I think they're hard games, but I think they're good games.
I'm not saying they're bad games. I'm just saying that and yes, if they were lousy, if they were, I don't even want to single somebody out, but there were definitely SNES games that were ridiculously hard. That were bad.
They were trying to elongate gameplay or something like that.
Right, exactly. Oh, you spent $50 in this game.
You better get.
We're going to make it impossible. 0.3 microsecond timings on getting past this one boss or whatever.
Yep, that's a good one. Good topic. Hard topic. But yeah, that's where I side on this one. So.
Yeah, no, I think, I mean, it's, well, I know it. Couple of years, there'll probably be a Bloodborne 2. We'll talk about it again. That's the way games discourse works. In the meantime, you can send us email at devgameclub@gmail.com to get our thoughts of whatever's returned in the games discourse. I appreciate your question, Darren. It is something we haven't really talked about, and this is actually the perfect series to talk about it in. So much appreciate it, even though I'm digging on the games discourse. Okay, well, next time, sir, I'm going to say, I believe we have, at this point, 13 more missions to play. I'm going to say we split it 7-6. So we'll do 7 more missions here.
Oh.
You can do it. I believe in you.
Hopefully.
I mean, you could grind. I've proved it.
Yeah, that's true. Maybe. We'll see.
All right, so we'll go through mission 17.
Yeah.
And that should do us for the next time.
Okay.
In the meantime, you can find the podcast on the web at devgameclub.com and, of course, on Twitter at devgameclub, where you can also find my co-host.
At Tim Longo Jr. with a JR at the end.
And most weeknights and weekends, you can find me at twitch.tv/Brett Duville. Weeknights, I've been streaming Alpha Protocol lately. And on the weekends, I do whatever we're playing for the cast. So this coming weekend, that will be Devil May Cry. Thanks so much for joining us. I hope you enjoy playing games this week. And good night.
Good night.